Hi, everyone. Welcome to JNUC Day 2. Thanks for joining this session today on Simplicity, Security, and Privacy with BYOD. I have the pleasure of inviting Stu McDonald onto the stage. He's an Enterprise Customer Success Manager based out of the land down under, Melbourne, Australia. So he works across enterprise accounts in the commercial and education space. He's been on the field for more than 10 years, so he comes with a wealth of experience. Before I get started, I just wanted to remind you to log the Q&A on your JNUC app. Just select the session and do what you've been doing through previous sessions, I suppose. Just log in Q&A via the app, and I'll be able to read the questions, and Stu will answer them for you. Thanks again, and please welcome Stu on the stage. Welcome, Stu.
Awesome. Thanks, Mel. So, all right, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm conscious as well that this is like before the party this evening too, so I'm used to seeing some thirsty-looking faces in front of me as well, so I can see some in the front row, and I assume there's more further and further out. Secondly, I'm not Fletcher Previn. If you're looking for that session, it's not here right now, but what we are going to be talking about is my talk, which is Simplicity, Privacy, and Security with BYOD. So before we get into that topic, I'll mention a little bit about myself. My name's Stu McDonald, and yeah, as Mel mentioned, I'm part of the customer success team in APAC. So specifically, I'm from Melbourne, often referred to as Australia's best city. Anyone who's watching on the stream from Australia could probably already guess that from what I'm wearing. And I've been with Jamf for just over a year, about a year and a half now. So prior to Jamf, I was a Mac admin in higher education. And then I've also worked in the education reseller space in Australia, helping schools succeed with Apple. Often these schools were in regional towns, Victoria and New South Wales, some of our biggest states. But if you'd also like to hear more about some of the other great things happening in APAC, I suggest watching the replay of Aaron's talk, A Jamf School Deployment Bigger Than Texas. So this is where I started managing devices years and years ago, labs. Back in the days when the iMacs were thick and so was the imaging. Mac labs, imaging, and straightening keyboards. Now, to be honest, there were actually eMacs involved when I started there, but this was the nicest, kind of straightest photo I could see of a lab to share. Flash forward, yeah, and that was my life. I was like, it's got to be perfectly straight for all the students come in, everything's right, and then of course it was all changed from there. So moving forward a number of years, here is one of those regional towns that I mentioned, Wangaratta, and I'll admit part of my appeal of mentioning Wangaratta is wanting to say that on a JNUC stage for the first time. But look, in this case as well, it's a similar thing, I suppose, more devices, more speed, and more mobile devices, but still organisationally owned. So I bring this up not just to show off the great time lapse that I have, but also to acknowledge that that's kind of the familiar territory. Organisationally owned devices, many of us here in this room understand that dynamic. So, now back to me starting at Jamf. I've used this analogy to describe to a few friends starting at Jamf, and like imagine being someone who's spent many years advising folks on how to build a fantastic theme park, you know, one that's fun, safe, etc., but you'd never actually been to a theme park as a guest yourself. Joining Jamf and sitting back and watching this provisioning process of my new devices was that for me. It was awesome. And it wasn't just an experience for me. This was, someone who, not just for me, someone who could appreciate the parts and processes of this onboarding, but this is what everyone experienced. Another bit that stood out to me as well is I brought my own phone to Jamf. And earlier that year, in 2021, when Apple announced Account-Driven User Enrollment, I was very, very excited, but here I was living it. So that was my sort of introduction to this workflow that I wanted to sort of give a big shout out to. So I'm going to break it down though into three key sections: the need, the opportunity, and the magic. So jumping into the need. Now, organizations have, so I suppose, Employee efficiency and productivity is probably the thing that stands out most to me. I've always tried to consider myself, a real advocate for the end user and their experience. But naturally, this is a balance as well, because it's not simply about that user experience that I want to be so nice and smooth. It's also a matter of making sure that these devices are safe and the organizational data is where it should be. So I also have heard quite a few amusing explanations for what this initialism of BYOD means. Bring your own disaster? No, not that. Behold your own demise? Bring your own doom? Believe your own drivel? Build your own dream house? No. Bring your own device is the correct initialism. No, not be your own dad. BYOD is bring your own device. So I guess the core question of BYOD in my mind is how do we provide secure access to organizational data on personal devices without compromising user privacy? So many organizations we find are already have a hybrid approach of personally owned or organizationally owned devices, perhaps accessing software, accessing corporate resources, but this may not necessarily be the posture that some organizations want to take. So naturally, there are different approaches to take for different organizations. But when we are talking about those personally owned devices that should be getting access to corporate resources so that we can, so that folks can get on with their work wherever they are and meet them where they are, the questions are, what state is the device in? It's a big one. And also, how does the user actually find what they need if we can provide them access to these services? So, as I mentioned as well, we have a very familiar experience with organizationally owned devices, and that means full management capabilities, supervised devices, organizationally owned, and on the less familiar side, personally owned devices with light management, we'll say. So this may not be the right fit for every organization or for every persona, certainly, but what we're going to talk about here are the situations where that could be a really good fit. So I guess, this is enterprise mobility that we're talking about here. So some less than ideal solutions to the challenge. Users just can't access organizational devices on organizational resources on personal devices, and that probably leads to the old story of carrying around 2 phones. And not a great experience, but I suppose it's a compromise. Alternatively, users can access org resources on a personal device once they authenticate, and we might also have some conditional access controls in there as well. Okay, that's a possibility. Users can access organizational resources on a personal device, provided the device is fully managed by the organization. This is certainly one approach that satisfies the security requirements that we have, but also, as an admin, I don't necessarily want more access or more management than I really need, particularly when it comes to personally owned devices and PII. They are different beasts. So, this leads us to the opportunity. So, I'm going to do a quick terminology check here. So, with our device enrollment methods, I have a few here that I'm going to bring up. So we have user enrollment that we're going to largely be focusing on today. And there's 2 subtypes here, profile-based and account-driven user enrollment. And we have device enrollment, which I will not get into too much here today because really my aim here is to get people excited about the possibility of account-driven user enrollment. So, as I mentioned as well, this is my BYO device at Jamf. I brought this with me when I joined the company, and I've since had everything I need provided on that device. So, if we kind of cut these away a little bit, we'll find where we're going to land, which is account-driven user enrollment. So, really, the special thing to me, and you'll hear me say this many more times, it's about the user experience. It's Apple native, it allows users to sign in with the credentials that they largely already have or probably are familiar with. Secondly, the separation of work and personal data. So when I'm enrolling a device using account-driven user enrollment, that device has 2 partitions. it will end up with an encrypted work partition where all the corporate data lives, and that's independent of the personal data that already existed on the device that belongs to the individual. So managed paste too. This is one of my real favorite little things, and I'll show this a little bit later on. So yeah, and simplicity. It's how Apple designed this to work. This is the statement that I always want to come back to. Organizational security doesn't need to come at the cost of user privacy. So let's go a little step further and look at what that great user experience looks like. So here you can see I have my personal device ready to enroll into this organization. And I should say here as well, big shout out to Tij Jaflair from our consulting engineering team who helped with this video. And let's jump on through. So what we're going to see here is the user is going to navigate to VPN and device management at the bottom of their screen and sign in with their work email and password. Nice and simple. Nice. We'll also see a step here authenticating with your cloud identity provider. Now, I will say here as well that there are some complexities to this workflow, and I am taking a bit of a liberty with describing how great this is, but avoiding some of the, I guess, technical detail. For that end as well, I should say here as well, I expected to have a slide here in my deck that's called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. And it'd be remiss of me to go any further without pointing out that we have a number of sessions that I would say are key to understanding and being across this topic. Namely, one of them was from yesterday. Emily and Mitch's session about how we BYO at Jamf has been fantastic. It went long, and I'm so glad it was the last session in the day, so we had that extra time. But there are certainly some unique challenges with integrating perhaps with your identity and your different stack that you may have. So I strongly recommend checking out the session that you should be able to find on the platform now. So while my video has just been absolutely tearing through here, it will eventually reach an end, and I want to just call out a couple of things that we've blown past, but this will still give you the impression, the indication of the speediness of this process. So, iCloud for work. I just want to say iCloud backups are awesome, right? So in the situation where I have an end user who has a device enrolled using Account-Driven User Enrollment, if they lose their device or it's destroyed or something like that, restoring that iCloud backup from their managed Apple ID is as simple as signing in. No problem, sign in, restore the data. That partition is returned to where it was, and that's a nice, smooth experience. Now, one of the other steps we saw along the way here was also a remote management screen. So clear language and transparency to the user about what can and can't be done on the device by the admin, I think is super important. It's meeting people where they are and explaining in clear language, in Apple's language, what capabilities exist there on the device. So, if I just jump on through to my next one, there's my sign in with work and email. We authenticate with the IDP. There's my little shout out for iCloud for work. In a moment, we'll see the IDP jump. Yep. Yeah, and iCloud for work. Signing in there with that managed Apple ID. All right, there's our remote management screen explaining very quickly, the user read that one pretty quickly, what is possible with this type of enrollment method. All right, so this is all great, and I'm devastated that Sam managed to use this same joke in his keynote earlier this week, but how can we make this even better? So by layering on a few different bits and pieces. Jamf Trust, And what we can do here is provide that ZTNA experience. So with the per app VPN for our work apps that we might be deploying to the device in the work partition itself, we can make sure that any traffic between those apps and our corporate services is secure and encrypted and, not subject to attack on third-party networks or untrusted environments. Now, here we are. This is what we always want to see. Nice, happy device. That green, ready to, you're all set screen. Now, if in the event the device was not compliant with those rules, it would be prompting the user to do, say, that iOS update that they'd forgotten to make sure that that was meeting our compliance requirements. Now, my favorite little flex to show to customers as well is not just the employee badge in Apple Wallet on my phone, but also the quick and easy access to physical spaces. And again, I should call out here that I am very, very much glossing over some of the challenges that may exist there. But I do that with meaning. I do mean to say that the important thing to take away is how great this can be. I'll be the first to admit that it may not be necessarily a short, easy path to get there, but the destination is worth it. All right, so remember those sort of like ideals for BYOD I mentioned from earlier? User privacy, organizational security, check, check. So, well, achieving both of those outcomes, well, that's magic. And this is also a little bit of a sleight of hand here as well, where I'm now going to say, how do we make the magic happen? And again, I feel that it should be pointed out that the session title maybe has a little smaller little subtitle in there. It's like simplicity for users. It's a great experience for them. And as a good friend of mine pointed out long ago, often our jobs as admins is to absorb that complexity for users to make it seem a simple, clear, easy experience. So that's, I think, a worthwhile thing to sort of consider. My slides here are not necessarily the most up to date, but we're going to do what we can. So, a couple of things, and again, broad strokes here. Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, your verified domain, and now we get into the trickier sections, managed Apple IDs and federated authentication. Now, for my own curiosity, just for the folks in the room that I can see here, how many folks have already enabled federated authentication with ABM? Okay. For the people on the stream, it is a fairly small number of hands, not too surprisingly. And there are challenges with this. Again, I'm going to really refer back to Emily and Mitch's session yesterday to talk about some of those challenges. I've certainly encountered some of them in education, but the larger the organisation, the more frequent the acquisitions may have been, either way, the more complicated this can all end up being. So, now here's another little challenge that's unique to this workflow, and it kind of makes that magic happen. So what it is this JSON file hosted on the same domain federated that you've already federated with ABM. So the host must support a HTTPS GET request, and what we're hoping the device to get back during this enrollment process is this blob itself. So we want the end user's device to be able to reach out to this host, find that file, and return back this URL. Again, very much simplifying this workflow, but at a top level, that's sort of the main thing to look out for. Now, this is another thing as well, an important thing to note. In this workflow, when you're deploying apps and content, you're deploying it to users who happen to be associated with devices, but I do recommend keeping that in mind. Now, I guess to sort of start to point out something that I think should always be reminded, we definitely know we need ABM or ASM. We know that there's going to be some work to be done with managed Apple IDs and federation. Never mind the SSO dot point that shouldn't have been there. And also our challenge on that hosting the self-discovery file. And yes, as in the words of Sean Rabbit, remember, read the fantastic manual. Our documentation here is really good. I can't stress this enough. Follow it religiously when building out this workflow. And to bring us back to the top, what we've sort of covered here in brief is the need that exists. So enterprise mobility, giving people the ability to work where they need. No one likes having to go back to their work machine if they could be out and about accessing that corporate data safely and securely. The opportunity, that's account-driven user enrollment, a way to find a pretty miraculous balance between user privacy and organizational security. And lastly, the magic, which was my sneaky way of saying the prerequisites that make the magic happen. So, with that, just like to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to me on the Mac Admin Slack. I'm Stu McDonald there. My email is also stu.mcdonald@jamf.com. And yeah, look, I really appreciate everyone taking the time. And yeah, let me know if there's any questions, and I guess we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. So thanks for submitting your questions. We have a number of questions through the audience here, as well as through our virtual participants. The first question, Stu, if a user already has an app installed for personal use, Outlook as an example, Jamf isn't able to manage this app as it wasn't deployed via Jamf. This leads to a situation where when management is removed, there may still be company data stored in the app. Is there a good way to avoid this?
To avoid it? Look, it is without a doubt a factor of this workflow that trying to deploy an app bundle that's already present on the device will not be successful. So that is definitely the case because that app has been installed by the end user, not by management. And so Outlook is, I suppose, going to be one of those more challenging cases. One of the pieces that Mitch and Emily talked about in their session yesterday was some clever smart grouping to find those users who do currently have that installed by the end user and then approach them individually where need be. But a great example that Emily made towards that point is we internally use Edge as the managed browser. So, with our install of Slack, if I'm to click on a link there, it will bounce me over to Edge. And there's some good reasons for that. But again, I'll give credit where it's due. Emily and Mitch's session is the prime spot to see that challenge explained and even some of the smart ways in which they've worked around it.
Thanks, Stu. The next question we have is, how does account-driven enrollment handle iCloud? When users want to retain iCloud services for their personal devices, Drive, etc., but also access the iCloud attached to their managed Apple IDs? Yeah,
the two can live peacefully in conjunction. So the benefit there is, I think I mentioned earlier on, the personal user, when they're backing up their device using iCloud, does not contain that work data. And with the inclusion of managed paste and sort of managed open in, it can make that a little bit better as well. Ah, cool. This is the deck I was looking for. So, yeah, look, I will just kind of, I think hopefully that answered the question sufficiently. I was kind of just going, that's what I was expecting. But I think that's probably the best way of answering it. It's a challenge to be managed, personally installed apps versus managed apps. And particularly with core apps, that can be a challenge. But it's one that can be worked around.
Thanks, Stu.
No worries.
Next question. When using user enrollment with a managed Apple ID, will your personal device have both personal and managed Apple IDs logged in at the same time?
Yeah, look, you will see in one of our screenshots earlier on that there is a distinct little work badge section available in settings once the enrollment has happened. Let's see if I can quickly jump through this in time. Come on, little guy. All right, so the two do coexist nicely. That's the screen, just one tap beyond where I wanted to be to show that piece. But you will see up the top the personal Apple ID and then underneath the work account. And one of the things I liked about that too is the transparency there, where an end user can jump on in and see the management capabilities, accounts, apps that are being deployed to the device. Yeah.
Awesome. We've got a few more questions still, so we've got a bit of time. How does Jamf handle BYOD internally for non-Apple devices? Bonus points for Linux devices.
Well, look, I wouldn't want to speak out of place on that question particularly. There was discussion about other platforms and BYOD in Emily and Mitch's session yesterday, which I recommend. As for Linux devices and others, I will leave it to better informed people to provide an answer to that question.
Thank you. Next question. The requirement for the com.apple.remote access file on the website is a massive pain point to getting account-driven enrollment turned on. Many website providers like Shopify or HubSpot don't easily allow that granular file-level access. Is there any plans to use alternative methods to enable this, like a DNS text record?
Absolutely. So that certainly is one approach that you can take to this challenge. Using some clever DNS records, you can make that probably be a little bit easier to approach within your stack than it may appear in the first place. But also, I'm like with any sort of workflow from Apple, I'm always really excited about the future direction that it's going, and presumably it's going to get better and better. So if that's a pain point, I'd love, reducing pain points would be great.
Awesome, thanks, Stu. For account-driven enrollment, is it federated account or a managed Apple ID that's required?
Federated, and that's getting into some of the challenges that exist there as well. So federation means also that the managed Apple ID format has to match the email as well. So these are definitely going to be some of the sharper edges that need to be navigated. But I do also hold hope that there are some folks with smaller organizations with less complicated identity stack and, less work to do to get this to the happy place, to the promised land.
Thanks, Stu. Doing well. When someone signs out of their MAID and signs back in, it re-enrolls their device. How do you manage not having duplicate devices for the same user when they enroll?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I'm trying to think what the behavior is on the server side when a user signs out of that. The record does exist there, but cleaning that up too, I believe, is a good practice so that naturally we don't want to have any more license count than we are actually using. So I'm not 100% sure on the best way to do that, but I would be happy to follow that up.
Thank you. Maybe one or two more questions.
Sure.
What are your experiences with enabling federated IDP when there are already personal Apple IDs with your company's email extension?
Yeah. It's important to know, and the information is available publicly, and Emily and Mitch went into quite a bit of depth yesterday. It was one of those topics that just kept on going. So that meant... sorry, what was the question again, Mel?
Oh, yeah. Your experiences with enabling federated IDP when there are already personal Apple IDs with your company's email extension.
Yeah. Look, there's speaking to your Apple rep, looking at doing this process en masse as early as possible and trying to get a bit of a dry run to see what the challenges might be there. But I feel this question is kind of, leading towards the challenge that exists with a user has already many years ago done this. So the behavior for that user when you enable federated authentication is a known quantity. Apple have quite a bit of documentation on what that looks like. Essentially, that user is notified that they have 60 days to nominate a different email address to attach that Apple ID to. But a really important point that Emily made yesterday as well is that this process does not reclaim the account. It really takes ownership of the email address so that it can be utilized.
There's a follow-up question. Is there a way to fetch a list of users that have a personal Apple ID with company mail?
I believe, when you initially do the process, you do get a summary of the numbers of devices that are in that, the number of accounts that are on that domain are going to be reclaimed. And I guess the key thing for me is thinking about avoiding service accounts, developer accounts. There are some challenges that exist there, so it's fair to say that is its own little project on its own.
Thanks, Stu. And we have a question from the audience. 1 second.
Yeah, I'm loud enough.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Stu. So
Hey.
how do you handle BYOD customers when, say, for instance, they're no longer with the company? They had BYOD, obviously they have work-related data, and that includes parts that encrypted BYOD partition.
Yep.
So what do you do to recover that data or make sure they don't no longer have access to that?
Unenrolling the device within, on the individual device record in Jamf Pro, if you were to click unenroll, that data, that work data, disappears off that device.
Okay. How do you handle full-time employees who just BYOD and then they just fade out, right, with that device, right? Is there, I guess you could set a job or something, a policy to track X amount of time, no longer doing connections to the network, and flag you to go ahead and do that.
Are they still employed in that case? Like when you say they fade out, are they still with the company or?
Yeah, well, went through the whole COVID-19 thing, right? And everybody in mass was out. Now we're like hybrid situations, but we have a lot of personnel that they think they might want to be remote. Yes, no, maybe, whatever that might be. And they're not in right, so they've got tons of work data on there. And then all of a sudden they just stop rolling into the network with that BYOD device, but all that data exists on there. So something needs to be done about that.
Yeah, and look, I think that would probably fall into the category of the planning phases that needed to come before, that process. But now, once we're in it, I suppose it's navigating our way out of that situation. It's probably going to be a little bit of a people solution in addition to a technical solution. I wish I had a silver bullet answer to that particular situation, but I think it's going to be inevitably a bit of a collaboration with, ourselves and HR and others to make sure that, look, hopefully I can rescind people's access on the basis of them not accessing corporate services for a while. That would be my approach there. No worries.
Thanks so much, Stu. And there was a question before on the personal use of Outlook, where Jamf isn't able to manage the app as it wasn't deployed via Jamf, leads to a situation where when management is removed, there may still be company data stored in the app. We have a user that has commented that your ZTNA security policy would need to change to not allow Outlook to be configured without management. So I think that's just, I just wanted to call that out if, for folks who have our ZTNA in place or Jamf Protect or our security suite. Yeah.
Yep. Where there's a will, there's a way. And look, I guess that's my main takeaway, for everyone here, hopefully, is to say, this is an exciting opportunity, not without its own little challenges to get there, I suppose. But that's, we work hard to make these great things happen. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stu. And
You're
thanks
welcome.
so much, audience, for, all your questions, really, really engaged. Thank you so much. And thanks, Stu. Great
Awesome.
job.
Thanks, folks.